Millionaire shocked when poor girl plays his childhood love song, but her identity destroyed him. The rain fell harder as Henry stood frozen in the middle of the Chicago street. His heart pounded against the chill, but it wasn't the storm that stole his breath. It was her. Across the crowd, beneath a broken awning, a woman sat at a weathered piano, playing their song. The melody they wrote together, before the world tore them apart. Her hair was longer now, her face thinner, but those hands, they were unmistakable. "Alice," he whispered. She looked up. Their eyes met for the first time in 17 years. Panic flashed in hers, and then she ran. Henry's world collapsed again. The world should have been quiet that night, but inside Henry Smith's chest, everything was chaos. Chicago's winter had never felt this cold, nor had its streets ever seemed so unfamiliar. The glass towers, the honking taxis, the hurried strangers. None of them existed in his mind anymore. Not since he saw her. Alice Collins. 17 years. That was how long it had been since she vanished. Since the morning he woke up and found her note on his bed, slicing open his youth like a blade through paper. She had left him. Without warning, without mercy. Or so he had believed. Until tonight. The moment he heard that piano, that melody, something ancient inside him stirred awake. A song only the two of them had ever played, written beneath the oak trees of their tiny hometown when they were still foolish enough to believe love could outrun the world. And now she was here. Her hands glided over the keys like the years had never passed. The city around them faded. It was just her thin frame, her hollow cheeks, the tattered scarf barely clinging to her shoulders. The snow danced through the light like confetti falling over a tragedy. Henry could barely breathe. His feet moved on their own, crossing the street as cars swerved, horns blaring. He didn't care. Nothing mattered but reaching her. "Alice," he whispered when he finally stood a few feet away. She stopped playing. The last note hung, trembling, in the air, like a question neither of them knew how to answer. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. Shock, recognition, fear, panic. She stumbled back from the piano bench as if seeing him had triggered some primal instinct inside her, the way prey reacts when cornered by the hunter it once loved. "Alice, it's me," he said, his voice cracking beneath the weight of years. "Henry." But she shook her head. No, you can't be here," she whispered, her voice brittle, barely existing. "Alice, wait." Before he could finish, she turned and ran. She weaved through the people, bumping shoulders, knocking over cardboard boxes stacked along the sidewalk. The scarf slid off her neck and flew into the street like a lost wing. She never looked back. Henry wanted to chase her. Every part of him screamed to follow, but he stood frozen, watching her disappear into the city like a ghost being swallowed by the storm. The air grew still again. He turned back toward the piano, now abandoned. The bench sat crooked. One of the strings inside the instrument continued to hum softly, as if the piano itself hadn't yet accepted her absence. Henry lowered his hand onto the cold keys. 17 years. 17 years of anger. Of believing she had betrayed him. Of assuming she had chosen wealth over their promises. And yet there she was, playing their song in the freezing Chicago streets, wearing a coat not even fit for this bitter night. If she had run off to a better life, why was she living like this? And why had she run from him like he was her worst nightmare? Something's wrong, his mind whispered. Very wrong. The apartment was silent when Henry returned home, but his thoughts were anything but. The skyline blinked through his penthouse windows like 1,000 indifferent eyes. He poured himself a whiskey, but it burned going down. His hands trembled slightly. That hadn't happened in years. He had built an empire. He had taken the pain of losing Alice and turned it into power. Founded Smith International, conquered markets his father once deemed impossible, sat at the head of every boardroom table. On the surface, his life was everything people envied. But tonight, he was nothing more than a broken boy standing in front of the same girl who once held his entire world in her hands. Only now her world had shattered too. Henry picked up his phone. "Marcus," he said when the private investigator answered. "Mr. Smith, it's late. I need you to find someone for me." "Of course." Alice Collins, 32 years old, she disappeared from Greenfield 17 years ago. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Do you have any recent information to start from?" "I saw her tonight." "You saw her?" "Yes. Here. In Chicago. She's not who she used to be. I want to know what happened. Everything. From the moment she vanished until now." Marcus's voice was calm, professional. "How soon do you need it?" Henry stared out at the dark horizon, his reflection staring back at him from the glass. Yesterday." He hung up and leaned back, the weight of the past and the weight of the truth, still hidden, pressing against him from both sides. Somewhere out there, Alice was still running. But this time, Henry wasn't going to let her run forever. Not without knowing why. Not without finally hearing the truth. Chapter 1. The first love that disappeared. 17 years earlier. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the oak trees of Greenfield, stretching long shadows across the small town park. The world here moved slower, softer, like the old swing set that creaked in rhythm with the wind. "Henry, wait for me!" Alice's voice carried across the gravel path as she ran, breathless. Henry Smith slowed his stride, turning back toward her with a crooked grin. The sun caught her dark hair, making it shimmer as she hurried to catch up. "You're always late," he teased. "That's because your legs are longer." She reached him, slightly out of breath, clutching the stack of music sheets against her chest. "Or maybe you just like making me wait," he said, nudging her shoulder gently. She smiled at him, that small, quiet smile that always managed to undo him. Alice wasn't like the other girls at Greenfield High. She didn't flirt, she didn't chase popularity. She lived inside her music, inside her quiet dreams. And yet somehow, in ways even Henry couldn't explain back then, she saw him. Not the rich boy, not the son of Richard Smith, the most powerful man in town. She saw him. They walked together toward the old oak tree that had become theirs. A secret meeting place where the world didn't interfere, where it was just Alice and Henry, dreaming up a future far bigger than the one their town had carved out for them. She settled onto the blanket beneath the tree, spreading out her sheet music. Henry sat beside her, watching the way her fingers traced each note, like she was memorizing a secret. "You know," she whispered, "one day, we won't need to hide here." "I know," he said, leaning back on his elbows. "We'll be gone. You'll play piano in some grand hall, and I'll run my own company, and no one will be able to tell us what we can or can't do." Alice laughed softly, glancing at him. "Do you really think we'll make it?" Henry didn't hesitate. "I don't think, I know." They had started as friends, long before romance crept in, before the world complicated their simple connection, before stolen glances became long conversations beneath the stars, before quiet afternoons at the local diner turned into whispered promises about the life they'd build together. By 16, those promises had become sacred. "When I turn 18, Henry whispered one night, as they lay beneath that same tree staring up at the scattered stars, "we'll leave, you and me." Where would we go? Anywhere. Chicago, New York, somewhere no one knows us. Somewhere you can play your music and I can finally be free of my father's business. Alice had clutched his hand tightly, her voice trembling. "Promise me." "I promise." Their world back then was tiny, but their dreams were massive, like fragile bubbles they protected from the outside world. Henry worked after school at his father's gas station, not because he had to, but because he wanted to save every penny for their escape. Alice gave piano lessons to local kids, squeezing what little she earned into a battered shoebox hidden beneath her bed. By the time Henry was 17 and Alice 16, they had saved nearly $2,000. "Just a few more months," Henry whispered one afternoon as they counted the money under the oak tree. "Almost there," Alice replied, her eyes sparkling. "It's really happening, isn't it? Nothing can stop us now." But they were wrong. Something could stop them, and it was already closing in. What Henry didn't know, what neither of them fully understood then, was how deeply his family disapproved of Alice. She was the wrong kind of girl. No powerful connections, no wealth, no benefit to the Smith name. And her father, Robert Collins, had his own secrets. His quiet accounting job had placed him closer to dangerous truths than he realized, truths that involved Richard Smith's empire. It was a fragile house of cards, one that couldn't afford exposure, and Henry's relationship with Alice was a loose card that threatened to bring it all down. Richard Smith noticed, and so did others. One night, Henry's father sat across the dark oak desk, his voice low. Dangerous. "You're young," Richard said, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "You think you know what love is. But one day you'll understand that family comes first." "It is family," Henry said firmly. "She's the person I want to build a family with." Richard's gaze narrowed. "She'll ruin you, Henry, and she'll ruin everything we've built." But Henry didn't waver. His father saw that determination, and quietly behind the scenes, Richard Smith decided he would act, without his son's knowledge. The plans were set into motion. In the weeks that followed, Alice began acting differently. Nervous, distant. Sometimes she'd stare off in the middle of their conversations, as if weighed down by something she couldn't say. Henry noticed, but whenever he asked, she only smiled and said, "I'm just tired. Everything's fine." Until one morning, everything wasn't fine. It was the day they were supposed to leave. Henry woke before dawn, heart pounding, excitement burning in his chest. But when he arrived at her house, she was gone. The house was empty. Only a neighbor, Mrs. Margaret, stood on the porch, frowning. "She left early this morning, dear," the old woman said gently. "With a man. Fancy car? Big suitcase?" Henry's blood ran cold. "What man?" "I don't know. But she looked happy, Henry. She left this for you." She handed him a small envelope. Inside, in Alice's handwriting, were words that shattered everything. "Henry, I'm sorry. I met someone who can give me a better life. A life you could never offer. I took the money because I need it. Don't come looking for me. This is best for both of us." Henry read the letter over and over as his world collapsed around him. She had chosen to leave. She had chosen someone else. Or so he believed. And from that day forward, Henry Smith buried her memory beneath ambition, wealth, and cold, calculated success. But now, 17 years later, here she was. And nothing made sense anymore. Chapter 2. The day she vanished. Henry didn't remember driving home that day. The world blurred past him, the trees, the gas station, the downtown shops of Greenfield, none of it registered. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, but the pain in his chest swallowed everything else. The note sat beside him on the passenger seat, the ink already smudged from the sweat on his fingers. He had read it so many times the words were etched into his skin. The curves of her handwriting had once been beautiful to him. Gentle, careful, like the way she spoke. Now they cut like glass. "I met someone who can give me a better life. I took the money. Don't come looking for me." The words replayed over and over, pounding like a drum against his ribs. How could she? How could they? After everything they had planned, after every late-night conversation, every whispered promise under the stars, how could she walk away so easily? The girl he knew, the girl who cried at Chopin's sonatas, who kissed him like the world might end tomorrow? She couldn't have written those words. But she had, hadn't she? For weeks, Henry didn't leave his room. His mother hovered by the door, occasionally knocking softly, but never daring to enter. His father didn't say a word, not because he didn't care, but because, in his mind, this was a problem that had fixed itself. He hadn't needed to intervene any further. The problem, Alice Collins, had simply disappeared. And Henry? He would recover. Sooner or later his son would learn what all Smith men eventually learned. Feelings were weakness. Attachments made you vulnerable. Love was an indulgence you couldn't afford if you wanted power. Richard Smith simply waited for his son's heartbreak to harden into ambition. And slowly it did. The first few months were agony. Every morning, Henry woke up expecting to see her text, or hear her voice, or find her waiting at the oak tree. She never came. The town whispered. Some said she had run off to the city with a wealthy businessman. Some said her family had moved away for good. A few cruel classmates at school whispered that she had simply used Henry as a stepping stone. He heard all of it, and each rumor buried his anger deeper. He never spoke to anyone about it, not even Marcus, who had been his closest friend since childhood. Instead, Henry threw himself into school, into work, into anything that numbed the sharp edges inside him. The shoebox under his bed, the one where they had saved every dollar for their future, sat untouched for months. One night, he finally pulled it out and dumped its contents into the trash. He didn't even bother to count it. Dreams didn't cost money. They cost you your soul. The only person who never asked questions was Marcus. "You okay?" Marcus would ask, quietly. Henry would shrug. "I will be." It became his mantra. "I will be." It didn't matter that sleep barely came anymore. It didn't matter that every time he heard the sound of a piano, even faintly, even in the background of a movie, his stomach twisted. He would be okay, because he had no other choice. By the time graduation came, Henry's world had shifted completely. He no longer cared about small-town gossip, or prom, or senior parties. The only thing that consumed him was his father's business, and the fast, sharp climb towards success. When his classmates prepared for college, Henry prepared for war, corporate war. He enrolled in the best business school his father could arrange, moved to Chicago before the summer was even over, and never once returned to Greenfield. The boy who had once sat beneath an oak tree dreaming of a life built on love, that boy died the day Alice vanished. In his place stood something colder, sharper, stronger. At least, that's what Henry told himself. For 17 years, he built. He built walls around his heart. He built walls around his life. He took every deal that came across his desk, every risk, every opportunity his father once warned him to avoid, and with every successful merger, every contract signed, he grew more powerful. Smith International wasn't just a name anymore. It was an empire. Henry Smith, the youngest billionaire CEO in Chicago, had achieved what most men his age could only dream of. But none of it made him forget. Because at the core of everything, behind every glass office, every gala, every quarterly report, there was always that ache. That single question that never left him. Why did she leave me? Until tonight. Until the rain. Until the piano. Until that haunting song. Until Alice. She hadn't just haunted his memories anymore. She was flesh and blood. Alive. Playing their song in the middle of a freezing Chicago street like she had never left. But she had left, hadn't she? And if she truly had chosen someone else, if she truly had taken that money and disappeared into a better life, why had she been sitting there tonight? In ragged clothes, with worn-out shoes, on a broken public piano. Why had her face filled with terror the moment she saw him? The woman he saw tonight wasn't living the better life she wrote about in that note. Something didn't add up. Something was very, very wrong. And this time, Henry wasn't going to bury it under more business deals and cold ambition. This time, he would find the truth, even if it meant tearing apart everything and everyone who had lied to him. Chapter 3. The truth begins to surface. The morning after seeing Alice, Henry didn't sleep. His penthouse felt colder than usual. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a Chicago skyline waking up under a thin layer of snow, but his mind wasn't there. His thoughts were still stuck in the cold alleyway, standing by that battered piano where her trembling fingers had played the song that once belonged only to them. He sat at his desk, staring at his phone. Marcus's name was on the screen. Henry finally hit call. "Marcus," he said when his friend answered, his voice unusually tight. "I need you." There was a brief pause on the other end. Marcus had known Henry long enough to recognize the shift in his tone. When Henry was calm, when he was angry, and when something cut deeper than either. "Tell me what's going on." Henry exhaled. "I saw her." "Huh? Alice." Silence. Marcus cleared his throat. "You mean—" "Yes." His voice cracked for half a second, but he forced it steady. "She's alive." "My God, Henry. Where?" "Chicago. Downtown. She's—" He swallowed. "She's living on the street." Marcus exhaled hard. After 17 years, Jesus. And you're sure it was her? Henry's jaw tightened. I would know her anywhere. Marcus didn't ask any more questions. That was one thing Henry had always respected about him. Marcus never dug where he wasn't invited. You want me to find her? Henry nodded, though Marcus couldn't see him. Yes, everything. Where she's been, how she ended up here. I want to know everything. And Marcus? Yeah. This goes nowhere but between us. My father can't know. Understood. Henry hung up and leaned back in his chair. He stared at the skyline again, but saw nothing. For years he had built his life on the version of Alice that lived inside his head. The girl who betrayed him. The girl who left him for someone richer. It had been easier that way. Easier to believe she had chosen someone else than to consider the alternative. But seeing her like that, homeless, thin, her face ghost pale, nothing about it made sense. If she had found the better life she wrote about in that note, why did she look so broken? And why, when she saw him, had she looked so afraid? There was more to the story, and this time he would find it. Marcus worked fast. By nightfall, Henry's phone buzzed again. Got something, Marcus said. You ready? Henry grabbed his coat, already heading for the elevator. Talk. Her parents died the same year she disappeared, Marcus said. A house fire. Total loss. Henry froze mid-step. His voice dropped to a whisper. A fire? Yeah, in Greenfield. The official report says accidental. Electrical fault. Both Robert and Linda Collins pronounced dead at the scene. Henry's breath caught. He remembered the Collins house. Small, old, always in need of repair. But Alice's father had been careful, almost paranoid when it came to safety. Robert Collins never even used space heaters. A house fire didn't feel like an accident. Is there more? Marcus hesitated. After the fire, there's nothing on Alice for almost 2 years. No credit history, no job records. It's like she vanished. Then she shows up in Chicago. Small jobs under fake names, shelters, soup kitchens. She's bounced around ever since. Henry's grip tightened around his phone. Did she ever marry? Any record of a child? Of someone else she might have been with? No, nothing. He paced across his apartment, a sick feeling building in his stomach. 17 years. Marcus, what happened to her? Who could have made her disappear like that? Marcus hesitated. Henry, if you want me to dig into your father, I'll need full permission. Henry's heart pounded. For years, there had been things. Small whispers, hints, that his father's empire wasn't as clean as the press releases made it sound. Deals closed too easily. Competitors who conveniently backed out. People who stopped asking questions. Henry had always looked away. Now he couldn't. Yes, Henry said, start there. That night, as snow continued to fall quietly against the city windows, Henry sat alone with a scotch in his hand, staring into the amber liquid like it held answers. It was becoming clear that Alice hadn't simply chosen to leave him. Someone had forced her to. And if his suspicions were right, if his own family had something to do with her disappearance, then everything he'd built, every dollar in his name, was built on a lie. 17 years ago, he had told her, "Nothing can stop us now." But something had. And for the first time since that terrible morning, Henry understood one simple, devastating truth. Alice didn't betray him. Someone had stolen her from him. And he was going to find out who. Chapter 4. The Family's Dark Secret. 2 days later, Henry pulled his car into the private driveway of the Smith estate, a place that had always felt more like a monument than a home. The massive iron gates groaned open as the security team waved him through without question. The mansion loomed ahead, grand, imposing, cold, just like his father. The weight in Henry's chest grew heavier as he stepped through the massive oak doors into the marble foyer. The butler approached, nervous, as always, around him now. "Mr. Smith is in the study," he said quietly. Henry didn't reply. He didn't need directions. He knew exactly where to find his father. The study smelled like it always had. Leather-bound books, old scotch, and polished wood. The fire in the stone hearth crackled gently as Richard Smith sat behind his grand mahogany desk, reading through documents with deliberate calm. He looked up slowly when Henry entered. "Son," Richard greeted, as though they were about to have a routine business discussion. Henry closed the door behind him with a soft but deliberate click. "We need to talk." Richard set his pen down and leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Of course. What's troubling you?" Henry took a step forward, not breaking eye contact. 17 years ago, Alice Collins. A flicker crossed Richard's face, a brief hesitation, but it was gone so quickly most wouldn't have caught it. But Henry did. He always did. Richard exhaled softly. "That old wound. Don't play innocent." Richard's voice remained smooth. "I told you back then, son. She left of her own will, took your money, found someone else." "That's a lie," Henry said, his voice tightening. "I saw her." Now Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "You saw her?" "Yes." Henry's voice cracked. "She's living on the streets, father. Homeless. Starving. She didn't run away to a better life. She ran away because someone forced her to." Richard's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. Henry took another step closer. "I know about the fire, about her parents. I know she disappeared for years without a trace, and I know you were involved." Richard exhaled slowly, eyes dropping for the first time. "You don't understand the situation." "Then explain it," Henry demanded. "'Cause everything I believed for 17 years was a lie you put in my head." The older man rubbed his temple, suddenly looking older than his 63 years. "Alice's father," Richard finally began, "was not an innocent man. He made mistakes, dangerous mistakes. He got involved with people far worse than you realize, people who demanded repayment." "You're talking about his gambling debts," Henry spat. Richard looked up sharply. "It wasn't just gambling. He found out things, Henry. Things about us." Silence filled the air like smoke. Henry's stomach twisted. "US?" he repeated, voice quieter now. "What things?" Richard sighed. "Robert Collins worked briefly as an accountant for one of our shell companies. He saw the books. He saw transfers that weren't supposed to exist. Illegal transactions. Offshore accounts. Bribes, laundered money. If he went public, you would have gone down. We all would have." His father's voice grew harder. "You don't build an empire the size of Smith International without making compromises. Robert Collins threatened that. So yes, when you started getting serious with Alice, we had to act." Henry's pulse pounded in his ears. "You used me." "We protected you," Richard corrected coldly. "If word got out that you were dating the daughter of a man blackmailing our company, our enemies would have come for you next. They were already watching her father. If she stayed in your life, you would have been dragged into the crosshairs." Henry's voice shook with rage. "So you made her disappear?" Richard stood now, voice rising. "We gave her a choice, Henry. We offered her money to leave, to disappear and keep you safe." Henry's hands curled into fists. "You framed her. You emptied our savings account. You forged that damn letter." Richard's expression shifted from defense to cold admission. "It was necessary," he said flatly. "The letter made it easier for you to let her go, for both of you." "You destroyed her life," Henry shouted, unable to hold back any longer. "You took everything from her, and you let me believe she was nothing but a gold digger." His father's voice softened, almost with condescension. "We saved you, Henry, and don't pretend you haven't benefited from it. Look at what you've built." Henry stepped forward, his voice like steel. "I didn't build this life. You built it on her pain." Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The fire hissed quietly behind them. Finally, Henry whispered, "And the fire? Did you start that too?" Richard paled, his eyes flickering. "No," he said, but his voice trembled. "That wasn't us. But when she vanished, they thought we were hiding her. Those men, Robert's enemies, burned the house looking for leverage. We knew. We heard whispers before it happened. But it wasn't our place to interfere." "You let them die?" Henry breathed, his voice barely audible. Richard's voice was empty now. It was already too late. Henry stepped back like he'd been struck. The man in front of him, his father, wasn't a father at all. He was the architect of everything that had broken him. and broken her. You knew she was still alive, Henry whispered. Richard didn't answer. Henry turned toward the door, his voice trembling but clear. I swear to you, Father, I'm going to find her, and when I do, I'll make sure she knows everything you've done. Henry, his father called after him, but his voice was already fading as Henry stormed down the hall. He wasn't that boy under the oak tree anymore. This time, he wouldn't lose her. Chapter 5. The Second Meeting. The city felt different as Henry drove through its streets that evening. It wasn't the skyline that had changed, it was him. For 17 years, Henry had carried the weight of betrayal, but now he carried something heavier: guilt. She never left me. She was forced to leave me. The truth was like acid in his veins, burning through every story he'd told himself to survive. And tonight, he was going to find her again. Not to demand answers, not to accuse, but to finally listen. The community shelter on the south side was tucked between two old brick buildings, its faded sign barely visible in the winter night. Marcus's information had led him here. She was staying here, at least sometimes. Henry sat parked across the street, watching the entrance. He had been there for hours. Finally, just past 6:30 p.m., she appeared. Alice. She walked slowly down the sidewalk, clutching a thin plastic bag to her chest. Her coat was too light for the temperature, her thin scarf fluttering in the wind. But her posture, it was proud. Stubborn, even now. Henry stepped out of the car, heart pounding. When Alice spotted him standing under the street lamp, she froze. Her eyes filled with panic again. Alice, he said softly, lifting his hands as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any second. Please, just wait. Her voice was cold, but he heard the tremble beneath it. What do you want, Henry? To talk. There's nothing to say. She took a step back. You shouldn't be here. Yes, there is. I know what happened. His voice cracked. I know what they did. She stopped, stiff as stone, her breath visible in the cold air. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Please, Henry whispered, taking a careful step forward. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Alice swallowed hard. And after that? After that, if you still want me to leave, I will. Her eyes darted around nervously, scanning for danger, for anyone watching. Finally, after a long silence, she nodded once and gestured toward the small park next to the shelter. They walked together, though it felt like miles separated them. They sat on a snow-dusted bench beneath a flickering streetlight. Henry could feel her tension vibrating beside him. He spoke first. My father, he lied to me. She said nothing. For 17 years, I believed you left me, that you ran off for something better. She looked down at her hands. Wasn't that what you wanted to believe? The words hit harder than he expected. You were protecting me, weren't you? Henry's voice softened. Alice swallowed. They told me, if I didn't disappear, they'd hurt you. Or worse. Henry's throat tightened. My father offered you money to leave, he whispered. Yes. And then forged that letter. She closed her eyes as her voice cracked. I begged him not to show you that letter. I told him to tell you the truth. Her breath came shaky. But he said you wouldn't believe me, that you would suffer more if you knew. Henry's fists clenched. I would have fought for you, Alice. I would have chosen you. Her voice broke into a whisper. You were 17. They said you'd lose everything. I didn't care. But I did, she finally snapped, her eyes blazing. I couldn't risk your life. I couldn't let you be dragged into their world. Her shoulders trembled. Your father made sure I knew exactly how much danger you were in. Henry's breath caught. And the fire? Her entire body stiffened. She looked away. They were trying to send a message to my father. He refused to stay quiet, and they killed him. My mother was home, too. She wiped away a tear that escaped despite her efforts. I was supposed to be home that night. Henry stared at her in horror. I survived because I was out, hiding, planning how to disappear. He couldn't hold back the crack in his voice. They wanted me dead, Henry. After that night, I became a ghost. Silence stretched between them like an endless chasm. I'm so sorry, Henry finally whispered. If I had known. You didn't, she interrupted softly. And even if you had, you couldn't have stopped them. Henry leaned forward, his voice trembling with a desperation he could no longer hide. I've been looking for you for 17 years, hating you, missing you, and the whole time you were running from the people who were supposed to protect us both. Alice shook her head, her voice hollow. And now, what does it change? Everything. No, Henry, it doesn't. Her voice was flat but exhausted. Because we're still from different worlds. We were always from different worlds, he said gently. That never stopped us before. I'm not the girl you remember. She looked at him now, her eyes filled with a kind of tired honesty that frightened him more than her fear ever had. I've slept in shelters. I've dug through dumpsters. I've begged for food. Her voice shook. You don't want this version of me. Henry's voice dropped to a whisper. You're wrong. She laughed bitterly. I don't belong in your world, Henry. Then I'll leave mine, he said softly. Alice's head snapped toward him, startled. You don't mean that. I do, his voice broke. Because the only world I want is wherever you are. Her tears fell freely now, and Henry reached out slowly, cautiously. This time, she didn't pull away when his hand closed gently over hers. For the first time in 17 years, their fingers touched. They both sat there in silence, their hands trembling against each other's skin. And as the snow continued to fall, Henry whispered what he had carried inside him for far too long. I never stopped loving you. Alice's lips trembled, but her words came as little more than a breath. Neither did I. Chapter 6. Enemies closing in. For a brief moment, it almost felt like time had forgiven them. After 17 years of running and hiding, Alice sat across from Henry inside his warm apartment, wearing clean clothes for the first time in weeks. She sipped tea in both hands, as though afraid it might slip away if she let go. Henry didn't stop watching her, not out of pity, out of awe. Even after everything, after sleeping under bridges, after living like a ghost, her eyes still carried that spark, the same quiet strength that made him fall in love with her when they were teenagers. You didn't have to bring me here, she said softly. I couldn't let you stay out there another night, Henry replied. Not after everything. She shook her head, half smiling, half defeated. You always were stubborn. Maybe that's why I'm still standing. For the first time in days, her lips curved slightly. The smallest smile. Henry's heart swelled. For the first time since finding her, he dared to hope. But outside these walls, others were already moving. In an office downtown, far from Henry's apartment, Marcelo Ferrara flipped through photographs laid out on his glass conference table. The same private investigator that Marcus had once used now reported to him as well. There was Henry, stepping out of his building with Alice. Henry, carrying her groceries into his penthouse. Henry, protecting her like a man trying to hide his greatest weakness. Marcelo smirked as he sipped his scotch. Very interesting, he whispered to himself. His assistant Patricia stood silently nearby. Do you think this will be enough, sir? She finally asked. Oh, this is just the beginning. Marcelo's voice was cool. Henry Smith wants to play savior. The press will eat this alive. Billionaire shelters homeless woman. The scandal writes itself. He ran his finger slowly across one of the photos. And if Richard Smith finds out his son is still tangled up with the girl they spent years trying to erase? He laughed softly. It'll destroy both of them. The next day, Henry and Alice sat together at the breakfast table. She picked at her food, appetite still fragile from months of surviving on scraps. Marcus found more, Henry said, sliding his phone toward her. She glanced at the screen. Police reports, financial records, even documents from the old shell companies her father had stumbled upon. They really did it, didn't they? She whispered, her voice barely holding together. They buried everything. My father's hands aren't clean, Henry said, and neither are his partners. Alice's breath trembled. And now you're risking everything bringing me into your life again. I'm not risking anything worth keeping if it means losing you again. But even as he spoke, Henry's phone buzzed across the table. A text message from Marcus. They know, be careful. Henry's stomach sank. They're watching us, he said quietly, locking eyes with her. Alice went pale. "They'll never let me stay, Henry, you know that." Henry reached across the table and took her hand. They don't get to decide anymore. But they would try. That evening, the knock on Henry's door wasn't friendly. When he opened it, 3 men stood outside, suits, sharp smiles, cold eyes. The same man who worked for his father. "Good evening, Mr. Smith," the tallest one said. "You're not welcome here," Henry said, voice like stone. The man ignored the warning. "We're simply here to discuss your future." Henry didn't budge. "Say what you came to say." The man's tone shifted, slick and poisonous. "Your arrangement with Ms. Collins," he paused, letting her name hang in the air, "is raising concerns. Serious concerns. Concerns that threaten your family's ongoing business interests. Concerns that could ruin everything you've built. My father sent you. We all want what's best for you, Mr. Smith," the man smiled thinly. "And what's best is that this reunion ends now." Henry narrowed his eyes. Is that a threat? A reality? Behind him, Alice appeared in the hallway. She froze when she saw the men, her face drained of color, her hands gripping the wall to steady herself. The tall man glanced at her and smiled. "Miss Collins, we meet again." Henry's temper snapped. "Get out of my building, now." The men exchanged glances, but obeyed. As they turned, the lead man offered one last quiet warning. "Mr. Ferrara will also have something to say soon. You've complicated things more than you realize." Henry slammed the door behind them, his chest heaving. Alice stood frozen, shaking. "They found me again." "Not just you," Henry said. "They've targeted us both now." She sank into the couch, tears welling. "Henry, I can't do this again. I can't run for another 17 years. You won't have to." He knelt in front of her. "I won't let them touch you." Her voice cracked. "You can't protect me from men like them." He looked into her eyes with quiet steel. "Then I'll burn down everything they're protecting." Alice whispered through tears, "That's what I'm afraid of." They sat there together, holding each other in silence as the storm outside their apartment and outside their control began to gather. Chapter 7. Between Duty and Love. The next morning, Henry's phone rang before sunrise. He didn't recognize the number, but he knew who it was. He answered anyway. "Henry," his father's voice came through, low and heavy, like the calm before a storm. "Come to the house. Now." "No, this isn't a request," Richard said, his voice colder. "It's an order." Henry's jaw tightened. "We both know you stopped giving orders the moment you lied to me 17 years ago. Don't test me, son. You've already done enough damage." His voice darkened. "If you don't come here, I'll come to you." The line went dead. Henry stared at the silent phone for a long moment. He turned to Alice, who was still sitting at the kitchen table sipping weak tea. She looked up at him, reading the tension in his face instantly. "Your father?" He nodded. "You have to go," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. "You need to know what he's planning." "I already know what he's planning." "Henry," she said softly, placing her hand over his, "I survived 17 years because I ran when I had to. You can't fight him if you don't know what he's willing to do." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. "I won't let them hurt you," he said, "and I won't let them destroy you." The Smith estate felt different this time. As Henry walked into the study, the old portraits of ancestors hanging along the corridor seemed like silent witnesses, watching him, judging him, reminding him of what was at stake. Richard sat by the fireplace, as always, but this time he wasn't alone. Marcello Ferrara stood beside him. Henry's stomach turned. "So," Marcello smiled, "you finally decided to join us." Henry didn't bother with greetings. "I assume this meeting has nothing to do with business and everything to do with threats." "Business is threats," Marcello said, sipping his coffee. "Sit down," Richard ordered. But Henry stayed standing. Marcello spoke first. "You've complicated things, Henry." "I don't answer to you," Henry shot back. His voice was calm, but ice-cold. "You will," Marcello replied, "or everything you've built we'll fall apart. Richard cut in, his voice tight with urgency. You're putting the entire company at risk. We are days away from announcing your engagement to Marcello's daughter. The merger is finalized. The contracts are signed. I never signed anything, Henry said. You didn't have to, Richard admitted. I signed as majority shareholder. Your personal stake is irrelevant. Smith International is my company, and you've always benefited from that. Henry's face twisted with fury. You sold me like a bargaining chip. It's business, Richard snapped. You knew this world came with sacrifices. Marcello chimed in, his voice smooth like venom wrapped in silk. And now here you are, about to throw away billions of dollars, political alliances and hundreds of jobs for a homeless woman. Henry's fists clenched. Say her name. Marcello smiled darkly. Alice Collins. The room went deathly quiet. Let's be honest, Marcello continued. Even if she survives 17 years of running, she'll never fit into your world. You'll grow tired of playing savior, Henry, and when you do, your family name will be dust. Richard added, walk away from her now and everything stays intact. The merger, the company, your future. Henry's heart pounded. For a long moment no one spoke. Finally he answered, his voice low and clear. She is my future. Richard stood, fury flashing behind his cold eyes. You're willing to burn down everything we've built for a woman who nearly destroyed you once. You destroyed me, Henry said through clenched teeth. Not her. Marcello let out a humorless laugh. You'll regret this. Henry turned toward him, calm but lethal. No. You will. He didn't wait for a response. He walked out. The moment the door slammed shut behind him, Richard sank into his chair, his hands shaking for the first time in decades. Henry returned to the apartment, his chest heavy but his decision made. When Alice saw him enter, she stood, her face pale. What did they say? He crossed the room in 2 long strides, cupping her face gently. I chose you. Her breath caught. But what about your company? It's not mine anymore. And your father? Made his choice, I made mine. Tears filled her eyes, but she shook her head. Henry, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. He pulled her into him, his voice shaking now. 17 years ago, I let them take you from me. I believed the lies because it was easier than facing the war. I won't make that mistake again. She pressed her forehead to his, whispering through tears. You're giving up everything. No. His voice softened. I'm finally choosing what matters. And for the first time since the day she vanished, they stood on even ground. No lies, no distance, only love. But outside, the storm was far from over. The people who had stolen 17 years from them weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. Chapter 8. A love worth fighting for. The official headlines hit 2 days later. Billionaire CEO resigns, donates fortune to charity amid scandal involving former lover. Henry didn't read the full articles. He didn't need to. The headlines were enough. The boardroom collapse, the canceled merger, the shocked investors, the whispers of betrayal and disgrace among Chicago's elite. He knew exactly where the leaks came from. Marcello Ferrara had made good on his promise. But Henry no longer cared. What once would have sent him into war rooms with lawyers and PR teams now barely registered. The only thing that mattered was the woman sitting across the breakfast table from him. Alice. She was still adjusting to the new world she had been thrust into. The warmth of Henry's apartment was comforting, but it also scared her. She wasn't used to soft beds and warm meals anymore. You shouldn't have done it, she whispered that morning as she slowly stirred her coffee. You gave it all away. No, Henry said gently. I traded it. For what? He reached across the table, taking her hand. For peace. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I don't deserve this. You deserve everything. His voice softened. For all the years you carried this alone. But Henry, they won't stop. You know that, don't you? I know. And if they can't destroy you financially, she whispered, they'll come after you another way. Henry exhaled and rubbed his temple. They've already started. She stiffened. What? They're digging, looking for old contracts, tax audits, anything they can use. They'll try to accuse me of laundering, bribery, tax evasion, anything they once did under my father's name. But you weren't involved. Doesn't matter. They just need suspicion." Henry's voice dropped, and Marcello's good at planting seeds. That afternoon, Marcus arrived at Henry's apartment, documents tucked under his arm. "You're both going to want to see this," Marcus said, spreading the papers across the dining table. Alice's face drained of color as she saw the files. They weren't contracts. They were threats. Anonymous reports, false police statements, allegations of fraud, even doctored financial records designed to frame Henry as complicit in Richard Smith's decades-old crimes. "They're building a case," Marcus said. "A public trial if they can, and if that fails, blackmail." Henry's jaw clenched. "So they won't stop until I'm destroyed." Marcus nodded. "Or until you give them what they want." "And what is that, exactly?" Henry asked, even though he already knew. Alice answered quietly, "Me." Marcus lowered his voice. "They believe if Alice disappears again, this all goes away." Silence. Alice's eyes brimmed with tears. She whispered, "They want me gone." "No." Henry shook his head, his voice raw. "Not this time." "But Henry..." "No." His voice broke. "I let them take you once. I won't do it again." Alice stared at him, voice trembling. "I won't let you lose your freedom for me. You're not the one risking my freedom." His voice softened. "They are." That night, as the city slept beneath a sky of falling snow, Alice lay awake beside him. She listened to the quiet rhythm of Henry's breath and stared at the ceiling. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to stay. But every instinct inside her screamed that she was putting him in danger. After 17 years of running, she didn't know how to stay. The next morning, she was gone. The bed beside Henry was cold. All she left behind was a note. "Henry, I love you more than you'll ever know, but I can't let you lose everything because of me. You've already given up so much. I need you to live, to be free. Don't look for me this time. I will always love you. Alice." Henry sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the note in his hands. His entire chest felt hollow, like the ground had been ripped out beneath him all over again. "Not again." He stood suddenly, gripping the paper so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Not this time." He grabbed his phone and called Marcus. "She's gone," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "I figured she might be," Marcus said calmly on the other end. "I already have people looking. Find her. I will." Henry stared out the window at the city lights below. This was no longer about protecting his reputation or his fortune. It was about protecting her. The people who had stolen their past would not be allowed to steal their future. He would find her, and he would fight for her, no matter the cost. Chapter 9. Rebuilding Life, Finding Peace. For the first time in months, Alice could breathe again. Not because the fear was gone, but because, for now, she had control over it. She found herself in a small town 2 hours outside of Chicago, Riverside, a quiet place with wide streets, brick storefronts, and kind strangers who asked no questions. It was the kind of town where no one cared who you used to be, only who you were now. Alice had arrived with nothing but a backpack, a fake name, and a quiet prayer. And by some small miracle, she found work. The local elementary school needed a part-time music teacher. The principal didn't care that she didn't have a polished resume or official degree. He cared that when she sat at the old upright piano in the auditorium and began to play, the children's faces lit up. Her fingers trembled that first day, not because she couldn't play, but because she hadn't allowed herself to feel joy in years. Now every morning she walked the short path to the school, her scarf pulled tightly against the morning chill, her breath fogging in the air as children waved and called her name. "Good morning, Miss Alice." Her heart healed in tiny pieces. Here, no one whispered her past. Here, she wasn't Henry's lost love. She was simply Alice. Henry, meanwhile, was losing sleep again. 3 weeks had passed since she left. Every lead Marcus chased fell flat. No paper trail, no credit card usage, no witness reports. She had learned how to disappear too well after 17 years of practice. Henry stared at her goodbye note every night, reading the same words over and over, as though one read might reveal a hidden message he had missed. "I will always love you." That part tortured him most. If she loved him, why did she keep running? Marcus called every morning with the same report. Nothing yet. And every morning, Henry would only say, "Keep looking." He had given up his fortune, his company, his name in the business world. But losing her, that he could not accept. Not again. By the fourth week, Marcus finally called with something new. "I may have found her." Henry bolted upright in his chair. "Small town, Riverside, she's teaching music at an elementary school." Henry closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the words. His heart pounded with both relief and dread. "Are you sure?" "Positive," Henry whispered. "Thank you, Marcus." "Henry," Marcus hesitated. "Are you sure you want to go there? She may not be ready to see you." "I don't need her to be ready," Henry said softly. "I just need to know she's safe." The next morning, Henry drove to Riverside. He didn't call, he didn't announce himself, he simply parked across from the school and waited. And then he saw her. Alice stepped out of the school building at exactly 3:30 p.m., walking toward her small apartment a few blocks away. She carried a bag of music books and stopped to talk to a few children along the sidewalk. She smiled at them, a real smile. Henry's chest ached at the sight. She looked lighter, stronger, almost happy. He stayed for 3 days, watching from a distance. Every morning she walked to the school. Every afternoon she returned home, sometimes stopping at the local market for groceries, sometimes pausing to pet a neighbor's dog. He wanted to approach her, to pull her into his arms, to beg her to come home. But he didn't. He waited. And on the fourth day, he finally gathered the courage to walk up to her door. When she opened the door, her face froze the instant she saw him. "Henry," she whispered. He swallowed. "I'm sorry." Her hands trembled slightly as she held onto the doorframe. "How did you find me?" "I had to know you were safe." She stared at him for a long moment before quietly asking, "Why are you really here?" He exhaled, "Because I love you, and because I never stopped." Tears shimmered in her eyes. She looked thinner but stronger, standing on her own now in ways she hadn't before. "Henry, I needed to rebuild myself. I needed to learn who I was without you saving me, without your father chasing me, without your family deciding my fate." "And now?" he asked, voice breaking. "I'm starting to figure it out." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll wait. However long it takes. You can't put your life on hold for me." "I'm not holding it," he said softly. "I'm building it, and if one day you want to share it with me, I'll be here." For the first time in years, Alice smiled. A real, free smile. She stepped forward and gently touched his face. "Thank you for letting me breathe, Henry." He covered her hand with his own, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll wait as long as you need." As he turned to leave, she called after him softly. "Come by tomorrow, we can have coffee." His chest swelled with a fragile kind of hope. "Tomorrow," he whispered. And for the first time in 17 years, they were finally walking towards something together. Slowly, but finally free. Chapter 10. The Final Choice. Weeks passed. The daily coffee visits became their quiet rhythm. No pressure, no demands. Just two people learning how to exist in each other's orbit again. Henry never asked her to leave Riverside, never asked her to move back to Chicago. He only listened, supported, respected her space. And that was exactly why, slowly, Alice led him closer. They spent long afternoons walking through the town park, sharing stories about the years they had lost. They laughed, they cried, and sometimes they simply sat in silence, content with being near each other again. It was a love stripped bare, no grand gestures, no glittering wealth, just two broken souls trying to fit together again, this time on equal ground. Then came the letter, delivered one morning to Alice's small mailbox in a thick cream envelope with an unfamiliar logo. She opened it at her kitchen table, Henry sitting quietly across from her. Her hands trembled as she read the letter. "What is it?" Henry finally asked, his voice calm but concerned. Alice swallowed hard. An invitation. To what? She looked up at him, emotions swirling in her eyes. A benefit concert. In Chicago. Henry's heart skipped. They want you to perform? She nodded slowly. The Chicago Public School Music Fund. They're launching a new program to restore music programs across the city. They found me through one of the school networks. They want me to headline the opening concert. Henry's breath caught. It was the first time since she fled all those years ago that Chicago had called her back. Do you want to do it? He asked gently. She hesitated, her voice almost a whisper. I don't know. You're ready, he said softly. You've always been ready. Her fingers tightened around the invitation. But if I step on that stage, they'll know where I am. Your father, Marcello, the press. Henry reached across the table, taking her hand. They're powerless now. My father has no control over me. Marcello has lost his leverage. They're nothing but shadows trying to haunt something that's already dead. She studied his face for a long moment. Do you really believe that? I don't believe it, he said. I know it. Tears welled in her eyes. Henry, what if I fail? You won't, his voice cracked. But even if you do, I'll still be sitting in the front row, proud of you. She covered her mouth, overcome by emotion. And in that moment, she finally saw it. This was no longer the boy she once loved. This was a man who had lost everything, stood against everyone, and still stood beside her. The night of the concert arrived. The city theater glowed under soft lights. Inside, hundreds of people filled the velvet seats. Donors, press, school officials, and strangers who had never heard Alice Collins' name before. But one man sat in the front row, heart pounding with every second that passed. Henry. Backstage, Alice stood behind the heavy curtain, breathing deeply as the final introduction was made. She wore a simple black dress. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had brought her here. She heard her name called. The applause felt distant as she stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding for a moment. Her eyes scanned the audience and found him. Henry, smiling, steady, unshaken. And behind him, in one of the back rows, she noticed something she never expected. Richard Smith. Her heart tightened. His face looked older, smaller. His once imposing presence now reduced to a man sitting quietly in the shadows. But unlike before, he held no power over her now. She sat at the grand piano, closed her eyes, and began to play the same song she had written for Henry when they were just teenagers, the one that echoed through the cold Chicago street that night he first found her again. The melody flowed from her fingers like water, sad, beautiful, haunting, and full of hope. By the final note, the entire theater was silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, and then a pause, a roaring, standing ovation that thundered through the hall. Henry rose with the crowd, tears in his eyes. When she stood and bowed, her eyes never left his. After the concert, in the quiet hallway backstage, Henry waited for her. When she appeared, he barely whispered, "You were perfect." She smiled, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I was terrified, and you still walked on stage anyway." He stepped closer. "That's courage, Alice." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said the words that had been building for months. "I don't want to run anymore." "You don't have to." She shook her head, breathing deeply. "I don't want to hide behind fear, behind the past, behind what your father did, behind what my father couldn't protect me from." Her voice trembled. "I want to live." He reached for her, voice breaking. "With me?" She smiled softly. "Yes." A tear slipped down his cheek. "Ah, then, marry me." She let out a quiet laugh through her tears. "You don't have a company anymore." "I don't need a company," he whispered. "I need you." "And I need you," she said, voice steady now. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching, their breaths mingling. "No more running," she whispered. "No more running," he repeated. And as they stood there, alone in the quiet, with nothing left to fear, they knew After 17 years, they had finally come home. To each other. Forever. 2 years later. The spring sun poured through the tall windows of the Hope School of Music, once an abandoned warehouse, now filled with laughter, melodies, and second chances. Alice stood in one of the classrooms, surrounded by children practicing scales on upright pianos that had been rescued from dusty storage rooms and carefully restored. Their small hands stumbled, but their faces glowed with pride every time they managed a clean note. She smiled. This was the life she never imagined was waiting for her. A life not built on survival or hiding, but on creation, on teaching, on healing. Her hand gently rested on her belly, feeling the small kicks of the child she carried. Their child. 4 months until she would meet her daughter. 4 months until the next chapter of their story would begin. Behind her, the door creaked open. Henry stepped inside, leaning against the frame, his face lit with that same quiet joy she saw every morning. "How are my girls?" he asked softly. "We're good," she smiled. "Your daughter has been dancing all morning. Born musician already." He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Everything's ready for the fundraiser," he whispered. "We have donors flying in tonight. If this goes well, we can open 2 more schools next year." Alice looked around the classroom, her voice full of quiet pride. "Look at what we've built." Henry kissed her temple. "No, look at what you built." They stood there, still for a moment, listening to the imperfect notes echoing from the pianos, blending into one imperfect, beautiful song. Later that evening, as the event began, the school auditorium filled with people, some wealthy, some ordinary, but all carrying the same hope: to give music to children who might otherwise never find it. Alice sat at the grand piano on stage, the same model she once dreamed of playing as a girl. Henry stood at the podium, addressing the audience. 2 years ago, he began, his voice calm and full of meaning, I walked away from the world I once thought defined me. The wealth, the power, the family name. He glanced toward Alice, their eyes locking. And I discovered something far greater. I discovered that real love, real purpose, doesn't live in boardrooms or bank accounts. It lives in the quiet moments we almost lose. In second chances we never thought we'd get. The audience was silent, Minnie holding back tears. My wife, Alice, Henry continued, voice trembling slightly, taught me that love isn't perfect. It doesn't follow plans. It survives. Through betrayal, through distance, through fear, through 17 lost years. And when it's real, it finds its way home. He paused, his voice breaking. I stand here not as a CEO, not as a Smith, but as a man who was lucky enough to be loved by a woman brave enough to choose me again. The applause was quiet at first, then swelled into a standing ovation. Alice sat at the piano, tears filling her eyes, her hands gently resting on the keys. And as she began to play that old song, the song they once wrote under the oak tree in Greenfield, the melody filled the room, carrying their story through every note. The pain, the years lost, the love that never died. That night, as they stood beneath the stars outside the school, Henry took her hands. You know, he whispered, I used to think we wasted 17 years. Alice smiled, brushing her thumb against his cheek, but we didn't. And he looked into her eyes, still amazed by her. No? She shook her head softly. We spent 17 years becoming strong enough to finally deserve each other. Henry swallowed hard, pulling her close. And as they kissed beneath the quiet sky, they both understood. Some loves survive anything, even time, even silence, even fate, because true love doesn't just happen. It chooses, every single day. Love isn't about how you start, it's about how many times you choose to stay. Even after the world tries to tear you apart,